All right, let's dive into something big, something fascinating. The history of economics. We've got some excerpts here from the shortest history of economics. So we're going to trace those economic footsteps from like hunter-gatherer days all the way to our modern world.
It's really remarkable, when you think about it, how humans are constantly coming up with new systems just to meet their needs. This whole economic history thing, it really shows how adaptable and innovative we've always been.
It's true. And it all starts way back, like 300,000 years ago, with those early humans in southern Africa. The book mentions they were already using tools, language, even making art. But it wasn't until that agricultural revolution around 10,000 BCE that things really shifted. What changed during that time?
Yeah, that shift to farming, that was monumental. Picture this. For the first time ever, surplus food was possible, attainable. It wasn't just a luxury anymore. And that surplus, man, it changed everything.
Right, because then people could actually plan for the future, store food for when times were tough.
Exactly. And some folks, they even had the freedom to, specialize in things beyond just hunting and gathering. It's like suddenly we go from scattered tribes to these organized civilizations, all because of a little extra food.
That's incredible. Just that one concept, having more food than you need right now, completely transforms society. The book mentions this term, consumption smoothing. What does that even mean?
So think of it like this. You've got surplus food, right? Now you can smooth out how much you consume over time. No more feast or famine. You've got a steady supply, which means predictability, security. And that, my friend, that's huge for development.
It makes sense. That kind of stability allows for some pretty significant changes.
Totally. Like people could dedicate their time to getting really good at a specific craft, and boom, better tools, pottery, you name it, specialized labor. It's a game changer.
It's like one innovation naturally leads to another, which leads to another.
Right. And you can't forget about trade.
Of course. And you can't talk about trade without talking about the invention of money.
There you go. Those early forms of money, like precious metals or even, certain types of shells, those solved a major problem. You no longer had to find someone who had exactly what you needed for barter.
Talk about a game changer. It's amazing how these early innovations were like, I don't know, like seeds or something,
Yeah.
laying the groundwork for civilization itself. But let's fast forward a bit to another huge invention, one that kind of revolutionized how information spread, the printing press. Now, most people just think cheaper books, right? But this book we're looking at, it emphasizes how the printing press really impacted ideas, the spread of ideas.
Oh, absolutely. See, the printing press, it brought about this era of accessible information, and that's key for innovation. One thing the book mentions is this idea of non-rivalry. It basically means that just because you share knowledge, it doesn't diminish its value. Like if I teach you something, we both have that knowledge now, right?
Yes.
It's like this free flow of information, fueling creativity and new discoveries, and this really shaped economies for centuries.
So we've gone from farming to finance to this massive sharing of knowledge. It's
Yeah.
amazing how each innovation builds on the last.
It's true.
Speaking of building, let's talk about the Industrial Revolution in 18th century Europe. Cities are booming. You've got inventions like the steam engine popping up. It seemed like progress was just like unstoppable.
It was an incredible time of advancement, but it also kind of shows I guess you could say the complexities of economics.
Like it wasn't all sunshine and roses, right?
Yeah.
The book talks about that.
Exactly. We saw mass production, factories everywhere, technology driving this incredible cycle of progress. But, it wasn't without its downsides.
Yeah, the book doesn't shy away from the negative side of things.
Yeah.
You had urban poverty, dangerous conditions in those factories. It even talks about the poor laws and workhouses in England, which, were meant to help, but often led to terrible living situations. It's like a reminder that progress isn't always fair or easy.
You've got that right. It's so important to recognize both the good and the bad that come with these big economic shifts. The Industrial Revolution brought amazing technology, but it also, exposed those social and economic inequalities that have had lasting effects.
Now, amidst all this innovation and change, you have this like pivotal figure emerge.
Yeah.
Adam Smith. You can't talk about economics without mentioning him. His book, The Wealth of Nations, and that whole invisible hand idea.
Oh, absolutely. Adam Smith, he's like the father of modern economics.
Right. And his invisible hand concept, it's still debated today. But just to make sure everyone's on the same page, could you break down what that actually means?
Okay, so imagine a baker, right? The baker, they don't bake bread just out of the goodness of their heart. They're trying to make a living, improve their own life.
Makes sense.
But by following their own self-interest, by baking and selling bread, they're also, without even meaning to, providing something their community needs. That pursuit of individual gain, in this case, leads to a benefit for everyone. People got to eat. And that's the invisible hand at work.
That's a great example. It
Yeah.
makes you think about how all these individual actions driven by, self-interest can actually contribute to this larger economic system.
Mhm.
But the book doesn't stop at Adam Smith. It brings in other thinkers from that time, like John Stuart Mill, too.
Oh, yeah. Mill's contributions, they're huge. He built on Smith's ideas, but he also looked at the ethics of capitalism, like what does it mean to be a good person within this system?
That's an interesting perspective. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the human side of things, too.
Exactly. One of his big ideas was this concept of homo economicus.
Which is?
Basically, it's the idea that humans are rational actors who always make decisions based on their own self-interest.
Okay, so a bit simplified, maybe?
Of course, it's a model, but it helps economists, understand and predict how people might behave in certain situations.
It's like a starting point.
Yeah.
And then there's his idea of opportunity cost.
Ah, yes. Every choice you make, it has an opportunity cost, right? It's what you give up by choosing one thing over another. And that's huge, not just in economics, but in life.
For sure. But while all these ideas are being debated, the world, well, it doesn't just stand still, does it?
Not at all.
World War I, the Great Depression, those events really shook things up. These weren't just historical events, they were economic upheavals that completely changed how people thought about economics.
Absolutely. It was like the whole foundation of economic thinking was being challenged.
And it's within that context, this global turmoil,
Yeah.
that two giants of economic thought emerge, John Maynard Keynes and Friedrich von Hayek.
And their ideas, oh man, they really set the stage for how we think about economics even today. But before we get into their differing views and how those ideas shaped history, let's take a quick pause.
Okay, so last we left off, we were talking about these two giants of economic thought, right? Keynes and Hayek.
Yeah, it was like this epic clash of ideologies.
Totally. You've got Keynes over here saying, nope, the government needs to step in, stimulate the economy when things go south. And then you've got Hayek on the other side, like, no way, free markets rule. Let the economy sort itself out.
And their debate, it wasn't just some theoretical thing, It played out in the real world with real consequences. After the Depression, Keynesian economics, with its focus on government spending during those downturns, it gained a lot of traction.
I bet. It was probably like a lifeline for a lot of people during those tough times.
Exactly.
But, it makes you wonder, how did governments even start measuring something as massive and complicated as, like, a whole national economy? The book mentions GNP, which stands for...
Our gross national product.
Right, gross national product. What does that even measure?
So GNP, it's basically a way to measure the total value of all the goods and services produced by a nation's resident.
Okay, so everything a country produces, no matter where it's produced.
Exactly. And it's a snapshot of the overall economic activity of a nation. This was huge, especially for policymakers, because they finally had a way to actually quantify things, to understand and manage their economies.
That's got to be so important, to be able to measure something in order to really understand it.
Absolutely. It's like trying to navigate without a compass otherwise.
Totally. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about, like, the latter half of the 20th century. You've got central banks becoming a bigger deal, new theories about how countries develop economically, and, of course, globalization. It seems like that's when the world really started to, like, connect, become super intertwined.
Absolutely. This era brought about some really significant changes in the global economy. We saw the Bretton Woods Agreement, which established a new international monetary system.
Right.
And then institutions like the World Bank and the IMF popped up, aiming to, stabilize and support struggling economies. It was a real push for cooperation and free trade.
It seemed like, I don't know, a time of optimism in a lot of ways.
In many ways, yeah. But of course, it wasn't all, perfectly smooth sailing.
Right. The book talks about that, too.
Yeah, globalization definitely helped lift a lot of people out of poverty, especially in those developing countries.
Right, which is amazing. But
it also created a whole bunch of new challenges. The book mentions an economist, Branko Milanovic, who did some research on this whole thing about global income distribution. His work shows that, yeah, globalization did a lot of good for a lot of people,
right.
But those gains, they weren't exactly evenly spread around.
Oh, right. It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. But some of those boats are, like yachts, and others are.
Rowboats, exactly. Milanovic found that the top 1%, they benefited way more than everyone else from globalization.
Wow.
And meanwhile, other folks, even in developed countries, saw their income stagnate or even, go down.
That's a really good point. It's a good reminder that just because an economy is growing overall, it doesn't mean everyone's benefiting equally.
Yeah.
So we've gone from those early innovations that sparked civilization all the way to the complexities of globalization. Looking back on this huge history of economics, what are some of the big takeaways you hope our listeners are thinking about?
It's a great question. One thing that really stands out to me is this idea that economics, it's constantly changing and adapting. What worked before might not work now. What works in one place might be a disaster in another.
Right, there's no magic formula.
Exactly. No one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's a crucial thing to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about the economic challenges we face today.
So if there's no easy answer, how do we even begin to address these challenges? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think it starts with being informed, with being open to different perspectives, and being willing to have those tough conversations. We can't just cling to ideology, whether it's from the left or the right. Economics is complex. We need to be open to new ideas, new approaches, but we also need to understand the history behind those ideas.
It's like being intellectually curious, right? Like not just taking things at face value, but really engaging with these ideas in a deeper way.
Yes, and remembering that economics isn't just this, abstract thing. It's about people. It affects our lives, our choices, everything.
Totally. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about what those numbers represent.
Exactly. Each data point, it's a person, it's a family, it's a story. When we talk about economic growth, we're really talking about the efforts of countless individuals who are all just striving for a better future.
And that's a powerful thing to remember, especially as we think about the future of economics. So as we wrap up this exploration of economic history, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away contemplating? What's that final thought-provoking question?
As you go about your day, just pay attention to the economics happening all around you.
Well, I like that.
From the cost of your coffee to the global supply chains that put food on your table, ask yourself, how do your choices as a consumer, as a worker, as a citizen contribute to this whole system?
That's a powerful question. It reminds us that we're not just studying economics, we're living it. So stay curious, keep asking those questions, and remember, understanding economic history can help us make better choices for a better future. And on that note,
Happy exploring, everyone.
we'll see you in our next deep dive.